Welcome everyone to the Thousand Goddesses Gathering Priestess webcast series. This is so thrilling to do this. It's just so exciting to have some of these very gifted, accomplished priestesses join us for the next 3 weeks. And tonight we're starting with Christy Michaels, who has devoted many, many years of her life to serving the mother, and specifically Mary Magdalene, if it's okay for me to word it like that. Christy and I first connected a couple years ago when I was organizing an event called the Great Mother Wisdom Gathering, and at the time you couldn't join me here in Maryland, and I had minimal budget like this time around. But this time we have air miles donated. Thank you to those who are donating your air miles to come join us in DC on October 20th at the gathering. So without much further ado, Christy, please tell us about your background, because it's so fascinating.
Well, I spent a predominant part of my life being a single mom, and being a priestess was not anywhere on my radar screen. I barely knew the word. And one day I was at a party with a group of women, and suddenly I was just struck in the center of the room with this idea that what we need is, we need women at the round table. And all the women in earshot heard that, came to me, we sat down and said, yes. And this was the year of the water dragon. And what was being downloaded at that moment was that it's time for women to rise. And so we all heard the call, we all felt the vortex of energy, we all responded with a big yes. We sat down and we go, now what do we do? I said, well, we should arrange to meet at a round table. And so a couple of weeks later, somebody happened to be staying at a house with a big, huge, old oak round table that seats 12 people. So we all sat around the table, and Celestine was with me, and we meditated, and we said, okay, we're here. What would you have us do? Tell us why we're here. We heard your call, we're here. And basically what we were told that night, or what I received as my wisdom for the evening from what was shared as women dropped into their meditation with that question, was, it's time for the priestess to go mainstream. And that was the first time I really wholeheartedly claimed the word priestess. Now, I had been ordained on 10/10 because I was in a writing group with a friend of mine. All the women in the writing group were all writing on the goddess, and they all had these phenomenal goddess stories. And one of the women was writing about the apparition of Mary Magdalene that had appeared to her and told her that she would be rising, and she wanted to know if she would agent her message. And her life got totally turned upside down. She ended up going to France and connecting with St. Francis of Assisi, had been sending his monks down to Magdalene's home on the Sea of Galilee in the town of Magdala. And so she wanted to go see that. So she went there, she met the monks, she walked the land, she found out the old stories that were being passed down from generation to generation, that Mary Magdalene was indeed a very wealthy woman. I mean, how did she get a jar of spikenard that they estimate is worth about $50,000 in today's? And so she just happened to find it along the side of the street, and she was a bimbo and she didn't know what to do with it. No, she was fully trained priestess. She knew what to do with it. She knew what it was for, its purpose. And so when I did some research on it, turns out spikenard is a sedative. And this is a few days before he's getting crucified. So you think he might need a sedative to go through that experience? And it's interesting, the word spikenard, because nard in Hebrew means light. So it was literally like she was helping to free him from his light body, and then anointing him as the Christos, she was able to help him step into his divine self. So he was, because we live in a dualistic world. And it just, from that point on, it just took off. I ended up going to England, Scotland, France through some magical synchronistic experiences. And Celestine has just come back from doing a very magical trip, which I'm sure she'll touch on next week some. But it's like once you walk the land where she walked and you're in that energy, it just healed everything. And I have a master's degree in clinical psychology, and I've done a lot of work in that field for years, trying to heal, you know, the wounds of a dysfunctional family and that kind of thing. But it wasn't until I stepped into my role as a priestess that suddenly I was filled with the power, with the presence, the divine love that allowed me to heal from the inside out. And it allowed me to receive visions and to share and extend, and then it just took off from there. So, and that's where I think you began to see me on Facebook with some of the programs and rituals and whatnot that I was doing. The very first vision I got was 2 weeks after my ordination, and I received a vision that I was to do a ceremony to honor Mother Mary for her consciousness to conceive, light, and birth a God. And little did I know how that would inform what I'm doing today, because of the Course of Love is now out. And the Course of Love is basically a channeled writing that is what you might say the next evolution to A Course in Miracles. I don't know how many people are familiar with A Course in Miracles, but A Course in Miracles had the purpose of trying to release the grip that the ego has on our mind, that you need to be afraid. And we learned that love is letting go of fear, and that we are at choice. We can choose love or we can choose fear. And so as more and more people realized they had that ability to choose love over fear, their consciousness began to expand and they became more open-minded. And so Jesus is speaking in this, and he says, this is the first time that we now have a consciousness on this planet that I can begin to bring forth this teaching that has never been taught before. And that is that we really need to go back and look at what my mother did, because he said, well, people don't understand. And I just love that when he says that, because he said, what people don't understand, it was my mother who brought the Christ consciousness onto this planet. She not only had the high level of consciousness, and you can Google presentation at the temple and you'll see all these Renaissance paintings that were made of when Mary, as a 3-year-old, was turned over to the temple for her temple training. So she was an incredibly high holy woman who was very well trained, deeply trained, and knew her destiny, you know.
With the Course in Miracles, who is that being channeled in the Course in Miracles? Is that the Virgin Mary? Is that Mother Mary?
No, Course in Miracles is Jesus speaking to Helen Schuckman, who is a professor, university professor at Columbia University, of all places, in New York.
Okay, and then the Course in Love then is Jesus talking to someone else.
Jesus is talking in the Course of Love to Marianne Piron, and Marianne's in the Midwest, somewhere Minneapolis or Minnesota or someplace like that. So she received that teaching, and she was told these things that I just explained to you. But it's because we're moving into a new world. And one of my free gifts to everyone today who's participating in this is I've put together a webinar of my research work that I did on the goddess in the crop circles, because I began to notice, and I was told that there were crop circles that were formed on Mary Magdalene's feast day that were about her and information in her gospel. And so that really grabbed my attention, and I wanted to find out what more, what that was all about. But there is definitely, not only is the veil getting thinner, but there's definitely a movement on the other side of these high angelic beings and ascended masters and whatnot that are really trying to support us and help us in being able to move forward to bring what we are supposed to be experiencing, which is heaven on earth. And so that's why when you were saying you were going to do 1,000 goddesses, I'm going to be one of those 1,000. I've got my whole community is all on fire with it. There's some people that are working on it right now, trying to get there. Celestine's going to be there. We're just going to have all.
It's amazing. I love how your community is so geared up to come join us in DC. I would love to know about, first of all, does Mary Magdalene speak to you? Does she communicate to you directly?
It's a little hard to hear you for some reason, but does she
speak to you? Do you hear her communicate to you directly?
You know, I have heard her say some things to me in very magical and synchronistic ways. But she gives me these irrefutable, undeniable experiences that there's no way. Either her or Mother Mary. You know, like one of the very first experiences that I had was I go to Unity in Marin, which is a very large church in Marin County. They have about 400 congregation. And so I am like getting these visions and I'm doing these divine feminine things and I'm trying to make my way into do them at Unity in Marin because they're open-minded and they have a beautiful church and a beautiful space. It's perfect for it. So what happened was the senior minister of the church, he had this dream. And the dream was that the Black Madonna came to him and she said, "Bill, I want the rudder." Now, one of the legends about Mary Magdalene is that she came by rudderless boat to the south of France with her daughter, or a slave child. Different legends, Sarah. And
interesting.
Yeah, and so she came by rudderless boat, and so here's the Black Madonna, who Sarah is considered to be one of the Black Madonna archetypal. There's a little shrine to Sarah on the shores of Maria del Saint Mare. And so she's saying to Bill, "I want the rudder." It's like she came by rudderless boat the first time, but this time, man, she's steering the boat. You know, it's time for the divine feminine to take control, right? The patriarchy has had their way and they've made a huge mess. And now she wants the rudder, right? So Bill looks at her and goes, no. Now, Bill Engelhardt is not only the senior minister of Unity in Marin, but he just happened to be the president of Worldwide Unity, the board for Worldwide Unity. So he's overseeing unity all over the world. And
that's a huge position to be in. Wow.
So she comes to and she says, "I want the rudder, Bill." And he goes, "No, you can't have the rudder. The rudder's mine." And she goes, "Bill, I want the rudder." And he's like, "No, I don't want to give you the rudder." And she's not going to argue with him. She knows who she is.
This is a dream.
This is a dream. So she stands and she holds presents to him. And she said, "The rudder, Bill." And she just looks at him. And he just said it was the most intense feeling. He said he released the rudder to her and he woke up and he's going like, "Oh my God, what just happened?" And then he had a flash. He remembered that I knew about the Black Madonna. So he said, "I gotta talk to Christy." So I see him 2 days later and he comes up to me and he tells me the dream and he goes, "Well, what do you think it means?" I go, "Bill, she wants in."
She wants in a big way.
She wants in, let her in. And suddenly the doors flew out open and there was no more resistance to my being able to work there, to do events there. And so for 6 years, we had this glorious service. Every Easter in the evening was called a moonrise service. And we would have a 6-station ritual and a couple hundred people would come and they would all walk the 6 stations. And they were all based on what was Mary Magdalene doing, what was her purpose, what was her message, what was her experience. So you got anointed with the spikenard oil, which I had flown in from Jerusalem. And then you went to the Last Supper table where you received what was the true intent of the Last Supper table, which is the heros gamos, the marriage of the divine feminine and the divine masculine in your heart. and the descent of the Sophia into the sacred feminine, into that union of male and female. And so it's the male and female in you, but it's all, and also your partnership. So we would have men coming with their beloved spouse. So it was always, the communion was always served by couples in love, or people that loved each other.
We're having a little bit of technical problems here, folks, but just bear with us. Yeah, keep on going, Christy. There's some internet connection stability challenges.
Okay. Well, hopefully it's getting recorded.
Can you repeat what you just said about the Last Supper? Yeah, it is being recorded, but what you just said, I think, got blocked a little. What were you just saying about the Last Supper and the heterogamos?
Well, the idea of the, Da Vinci painted Mary Magdalene supposedly sitting next to Jesus, and at the table, and so it's not the original, before the whole thing of the idea of the sacrifice and I died for your sins and you're a sinner and all that came on the scene. That wasn't on the scene originally. Originally it was a love feast, and there was the breaking of bread. There was the coming together in love and in union with each other. And so the bread of life and the juiciness of the spirit of wine. I mean, his first miracle was turning water into wine, because that's the spirit of life. That's the joy and the celebration of life. You break out the wine at the parties. It's like, this is what we're supposed to be doing. We're supposed to be sitting down, breaking bread with each other and experiencing heaven on earth, and extending and sharing love with each other. And so it all got into the idea of the heteros gamos, which is the sacred union or the sacred marriage. It's a marriage that we do within ourselves, because we live in a world of duality. We have black and white and dark and day and night, and we have male and female. So it's bringing those dualities together, and so that we can experience wholeness and oneness. And that's how we learn to be able to experience our oneness with God, is we have to bring all those fragmented parts of ourselves and join them together. Because it looks like you're out
Christy,
yeah, go ahead.
Well, a lot of people still are not sure who Mary Magdalene really is. I mean, I was raised Catholic, and for years, I had the sense that she was a prostitute, because that's what we were taught. And I'm kind of going back to elementary stuff here. I know for you and all your training with her, but can you talk about her early years before she met Christ? And didn't she study as a priestess? She was far more, obviously, than the church painted her out to be for centuries.
Yeah. Well, this is one of the things that Elizabeth Kelley, who ordained me with Lady Olivier, discovered when she went to Mary Magdalene's home and talked to the families that had been there for generations, and the oral stories that were being passed down, was that she was actually a very wealthy woman. The Catholic Church has now issued a public proclamation, they did in 1969, that said that Pope Gregory saying that she was the woman of the well and that was a prostitute was an error, that there was no evidence of that, and that actually the evidence is contrary, is that she was a wealthy woman. It's like, where did she get the money to buy this expensive jar of spikenard? And but unfortunately, Pope Gregory was at the time when the women used to be able to be married to the priest, and they were the priestess and the man was the priest, and they taught and worked together in the community. And then when the priest died, the woman would often carry on the ministry of what she and her husband had started and were doing. And of course, the church was now starting to acquire wealth. And so they had to put a stop to that, because these women were inheriting the land and the church and the wealth and the community, and they wanted that all to go back to the church.
Oh, okay. So you're talking about during the time of Pope Gregory, not when Mary Magdalene was alive.
No. Yeah.
Okay.
all the demonization of Magdalene, everything happened and was pretty much well in place by the 12th century. Even the word that says in the Bible that Magdalene, Jesus cast out 7 demons out of Mary Magdalene. What we do have is we have some fragments that were written in ancient Greek. And the word in ancient Greek is diomon. And diomon means one who is of a divine nature. It's someone who has the good spiritedness of the Spirit in them. And it also has this quality to it that that you're moving from your humanness to your spirit, your fully enlightened, beautiful, spirited self. So the verb form of it, Jesus said that he cast out, with that word that means distribute, or cast out is distributing, which means that when she met him, because of who he was and the work that he had done in being informed and trained by his mother, by the way, that allowed him to step into his Christ self, that she, in essence, became fully awake in his presence. Oh. So it opened her up to the highest order of her diomon state of good spiritedness, happiness, and joy, because she was before someone who had mastered that. And she remembered the Martha and Mary story where she sits at his feet and she just like hangs on every word he says. Well, she was the only one who was really listening. And so she understood what it was that he was trying to say, or what he was trying to teach about how you yourself have your own inner axis, and you can go into your state of oneness, that you can rise to know. He said, the Father and I are one. And this is for you to know as well, and that we are to have the mind of Christ. Even Paul said that later on. We are to have the mind of Christ in us, as us. We have to awaken to this knowledge. So
Christy,
go ahead.
So Mary Magdalene was already trained as a priestess prior to meeting Christ, right?
Well, according to Elizabeth, they said that when she was of marrying age, and back in those days, you didn't get to say, your parents arranged it and all that. She didn't want to get married. And so the legend is that she was sent to be with her mother's sister, who was a priestess of the temple of Isis. So she went down to Egypt and she stayed with her aunt. And that's how she learned all about essential oils. That's why she knew what to do with the oils. She knew what the oils were all about. And so when she came back up and settled in Magdala, she established a business there. And that particular land that still the Franciscan monks are on, and they're now excavating that land, has about 5 different springs under the land. So it's very prolific in its growth of all these plants and herbs and whatnot that they use to make the oils. So the legend is that she hired over 100 widowed women, because widowed women were throwaways and rubbish. If you couldn't marry your husband's brother, then you were cast out. You were just out of luck. And so she took all these women in, and she had them do this business where they made all these libations and tinctures and oils and whatnot. And it's right on the caravan route. So she was able to get spikenard because she had the money from a successful business. She was a successful businesswoman. And in Luke chapter 8, it says Mary Magdalene was among the women who financed Jesus's ministry.
So all of this was actually in Israel, that she had this business and this land. Mm-hmm. That is so interesting. I had no idea. That is so interesting.
Yeah, I know.
And this was before QuickBooks. She must have somehow, brilliant. Absolutely amazing.
Yeah.
So that was before she met Christ, she was doing that. And then during that time.
And then she met him and she joined with him. And of course he made her. We see this in, I don't know if you've ever read the Urantia book, but the Urantia book talks about the women disciples, that there was a women corps and there was the apostle men corps. And so Magdalene was the head of the women's corps of women disciples.
That's so that completely was edited out of the Bible, wasn't it?
Yeah, and so they even name who those women are. And it's just, I had a chance to be a speaker at the Urantia conference one year, and I just said, can you imagine if some of the women, we do know of them, their names are in the Bible, and so there is a little bit of history about who these women were, but these were women that were all very much a part of the discipleship of women who were in service to Jesus, and they were the ones that were funding his ministry. That's how he was able to go where he could go and do what he could do, because of the financial contributions of the women.
And so how old was she when Christ was put on the cross? Was she still pretty young?
I imagine so. I don't know that per se.
Yeah.
But yeah, she wasn't, I mean, what did she and Joseph got together when she was still basically a teenager. So it's hard to put all that timeline together.
Yeah. You said Mary Magdalene and Joseph?
I didn't mean.
You mean Christ?
That's Mother Mary's story.
Yeah. I was going to say, now, how many men were in her life that we didn't know about? It's true.
That's one of the things that some of the scholars that I have worked with and studied is that the word Mary, because there's Mary Solomon and Mary Jacob and Mary Magdalene and Mother Mary, that really what the word Mary was a title of reverence. It meant that you were a high holy woman if you had that name. It was something that was more of a title than it was your personal individual name.
That's so interesting, because I was born with the name Mary.
Ah.
And I honestly didn't like it that much. And this is not about me, but I ended up changing my name legally to Mare, because I have the exact same name as my mother. She's Mary. But getting back to Mary Magdalene, so she started a mystery school in France, and you studied.
Well, she went and traveled through out France, and when you travel to France, you'll see there's so much evidence of places where she was supposed to have lived, where her relics are, where she was known to and thought to have taught, and then usually wherever were places that she was thought to have been, there would be a shrine or a temple, or a church or something that would be there to honor her. So there's all kinds of churches and cathedrals and whatnot that are in France, because they really adore her and Mother Mary, and they really are incredible for giving people that were here in America. In fact, that's one of the funny stories that I'll be telling at the seminar I'm doing on Sunday night, which is, it's like they tried to suppress these stories, but fortunately, there really is not a true way to suppress, because ultimately we're connected to the one mind, the divine mind of God. We're connected to the all. It's kind of like if God is the ocean, we are like individual waves. And of course, some of us are like tsunamis, and we crash and burn and do havoc. And others of us are gentle, and we play along the shore with the feet of the children and have a good life, But that's our choice, how we individuate ourselves. But nowhere are we not a part of God. We're all connected in that oneness. And so she in my study of the Gospel of Mary Magdalene has really led me to understand that what we have missed by not having her gospel and really having a deep study, which it's not happening yet today. That's why I've committed to doing so much research and work on it, because the more that I dive into it and study it, the whole thing comes alive for me. And that is that there are these things that we just don't understand that went into mystery schools, and the mystery schools had to go underground because of the witch burning and all of that happened. And so this is now the first time in our culture that it's been safe enough for this all to rise up again. And like in the Course of Love, they're talking about the consciousness is now, there's enough open-minded people that they can actually now start bringing in the higher level teachings that will teach us how to actually create and manifest heaven on earth, and have that be. And the work that you're doing, you know, having 1,000 goddesses on the Washington Mall, that's a big piece of that. You know, we saw it right away, and that's why so many in my community they're either going to form their own circles or they're coming.
Yeah, I love that some in your community are going to be doing their own circles, and please have them register. We want to put them on our map. The map is growing of all the events around the planet. It's so exciting.
Yeah.
But, you know, so the mystery school that you studied, and can you talk a little bit more about it? Because it's my understanding this was secret. As you were just saying, these schools had to be secret.
Well, for one story, and again, you know, it's like we don't have birth certificates and death certificates. There isn't a clear, like, that's why I stay so close to the Gospel of Mary Magdalene, because we actually do have the paper. We do have the documentation that gives us. And when I was talking with Joseph Rowe, who translated the Gospel of Mary Magdalene into English, there's a couple of different translations. One is Karen King's translation, and she's with Harvard Divinity School. And then there's Leloup, who's a Dominican priest, and he translated it as well into French, Coptic into French. But I like Leloup's version better, because Jacques Leloup, because he's going of the mind of oneness and the philosophy of that there's a direct connect, and that we can have that direct connect. And when we make that direct connection, we will know we are one with God. Whereas with the Karen King model, she's so influenced by the Protestant father-child that her translation reflects that you're a child and God's the father, and you still got this parent-child thing going on, instead of the real truth is that you know, we're equal in spirit. We're not separate, and we're not childlike, although there is qualities or attributes of the child archetype that serve us in humbling ourselves. That was like when I met you, you know, there was a level of humility that you hold and carry about the work that you're in service and doing. And I'll tell you, it was like a breath of fresh air that just came over me, because I could feel it in the vibration of your energy and the way that you spoke to me. It was like, oh, this is so beautiful and so wonderful. So that's in regards to the mystery schools, this is the Alpha and the Omega. And you'll find, because some people will say, well, there are women who believe Magdalene was a tantric priestess. There were women who believe Magdalene a more traditional role. There are women, you know, there's like all these different archetypal. And one time we did a whole event on all the archetypes of Magdalene, which I think we came up with like 18 or 20.
Oh my gosh.
Magdalene archetypes. In other words, that's the way that she expresses. And this is why she's so endearing to people, because there's this way in which she can speak and relate to so many people. If they need to know her through that path, they'll read Tom Kenyon's book, the Magdalene manuscripts. If they need to know it from an even more esoteric way, they might read Kathleen McGowan's The Expected One. If they need to know it from, you know, and for me personally, I include it all, because it's all these archetypal energies that have been suppressed and put down. And so there will be women who will be guided to express some of the mysteries. You might technically call them mystery school teachers, because they will be going through a portal and a way. So like, for example, when Joseph Rowe, who's was pretty agnostic, but he a very accomplished scholar and musician and whatnot, and he had translated the Gospel of Thomas as well. And I asked him one day, I said, because I took a year to go through 18 pages with the group. And what we did was every little section, whatever the idea was that was contained, we researched it, we studied it, we meditated, we did ritual around it. And so we had this incredible deep dive every month with all these aspects. And we didn't know how long it was going to take us. But I found that doing that, it just opened something up into me, and it created a vibration and healing and power and energy in my life like unlike I'd ever had. And so I said to him, I just was curious about your experience. And he goes, well, he said, to be honest with you, translating the Gospel of Mary Magdalene woke me up. Because as a translator, you have to really get what this word is. And the words back in the ancient times have much more significant, deeper layers and meanings of how they were used and where they were used, and the richness and the culture and everything that wraps around a word is just like, when you open it up, it's like this flowering expression. And so he had the same kind of experience, that there was this incredible vibration and
so Mary Magdalene, clearly, so you're saying she wrote the Gospel of Mary Magdalene, or it was written about her?
Well, we don't know. There's a wonderful YouTube, which I can send you the link to, and it was something I always wanted to do, because I thought this would be so great for somebody to do as a play. And so somebody did a YouTube thing, and it's just reading straight out of but somebody plays Mary Magdalene. And so it sounds like Mary Magdalene wrote it, and she is talking to us. They haven't been able to document that 100% for sure, that it was written by her.
And where was it discovered?
It was discovered in Egypt. In an interesting, one part of the discovery that's so fun is it was discovered in Akhman, which is an area of Egypt that had a lot of goddess worship and goddess temples, and it was found in a first century first century Christian burial ground in the wall, and it was wrapped in feathers. And when I read that it was wrapped in feathers, I thought that's really quite an interesting metaphor, because in one of the Egyptian goddess stories is the feather of Ma'at, right? So the feather of Ma'at is the feather of justice. And when you're ready to enter heaven, they take your heart and they weigh it against, to see if your heart is as light as a feather. So if your heart is as light as a feather, you go to heaven. Otherwise, you get your heart gets devoured. So I just wrote this is the feather with the heart. Somebody asked me to do a crone's ritual at the goddess festival camp up in Mendocino. And so I thought, well, all the crones are going to get feathers with hearts on the end of them. So I made all these feathers heart, because the word crone means disagreeable woman. And I always knew that word just didn't resonate with me. It had some kind of weirdness about it that I couldn't quite put my foot on it. But when I had to do the research for creating this ritual, I thought, oh my God, of course, disagreeable woman. Wouldn't they want to paint that picture? Do not go to the older wise woman and seek her counsel and wisdom. Because if you do, she's going to tell you about the ways of the patriarchy. And she's had a bit of experience in dealing with men. And so she can help you navigate the emotional waters. So all of the story tales that were written, back in the 1800s, like, the Little Mermaid story, and were all written by very patriarchal men. And so the women even if they were beautiful, they would turn into these dragons and they would devour your beloved. And you were told to be distracted about, go find your beloved, because that's where your love is. You're not whole until you find, instead of telling the truth, which is that you are whole. And the love is within you, and you need to find your love in you. And if you find that love in you, and then you share and extend that love to a beloved, and he does the same, he's self-responsible and goes within himself and connects with his own love and then shares and extends. Now you've got a chance. And that's the beautiful, another example of the powerful demonstration of Mary Magdalene and Jesus, that they were the enlightened couple. They understood how to be in that loving heteros gamma sacred union, total namaste, total respect to each other place. And we lost that when they marginalized her and minimized her and made her a prostitute and caused the priest to have to be celibate. And now what is it? There's like over 100,000 children that have been molested.
Oh yeah, the legacies there are really, really tragic. It's the church, as we know, has taken some very dark turns and it's still digging itself out. But I'm curious, just because Mary Magdalene's story is so fascinating to me. Did she make it up to Scotland? There's a chapel there, the Rosslyn Chapel, and it was even I think brought forward in the movie or the book with Dan Brown's The Da Vinci Code, and he did a lot. He did a lot to wake up a lot of people about the divine feminine. It's very interesting. But what do you know about the Rosslyn Chapel?
But actually, it was the females in his life that did it. He wasn't going to write about Magdalene originally. This is the wonderful story I heard. He was on an airplane, and there was a woman sitting next to him who was reading The Woman with the Alabaster Jar, that was written by Margaret Starkberg, which is the story of Mary Magdalene revealed. And because Margaret Starkberg was this army wife with 5 kids or something, and she was just mortified and horrified when she said that they were that Jesus was married. And so she was also an academic scholar, so she said, I'm going to go and research this and I'm going to prove it wrong. And she went and did this incredible research, and she actually proved it right. She said there's more biblical based evidence that she found that was showing that they were married, and that the wedding of Canaan was most likely theirs. And there were all these reasons for it and all the symbols, and she talks about the symbols and whatnot. And then she has her own magical and mystical stories, like I don't know if you've seen the movie The Little Mermaid.
Many years ago, yeah.
Yeah, so Arielle, with her long red Magdalene hair, dives down. She's half, right? She wants to be fully human. She goes down to the bottom of and she pulls up this painting of Mary Magdalene. And now she has a grandson, and she has watched the Little movie too many times since she can count, because that's his favorite movie.
Margaret Starkberg has, okay.
Yeah. And this little girl named Sarah, and you remember Magdalene's daughter supposedly name is Sarah. This little playmate of her grandson's name is Sarah, 7 years old. She comes up to Margaret and she says, oh, did you see Mary Magdalene in The Little Mermaid? And Margaret goes, no, I didn't see it. And so she got the movie again and she watched it, and sure enough, there it is when she goes into the cave right before her father destroys everything in the cave. Up on the wall for just 5 seconds is the George Latour painting of the smoking flame. So I do a whole, that'll be in the seminar that we do on Sunday, but I tell why I think he picked that painting. It's a very important painting in the awakening of Mary Magdalene, in the story that it tells.
So getting back to Rosslyn Chapel then, so Mary Magdalene did travel there in her travels through Europe? There
are evidences, and there are certainly legends and stories about, her being in Glastonbury, and there's an abbey that has the name on there of Jesus and Mary. There is, all kinds of indications that they were traveling there was travel that happened with Joseph of Arimathea and her up in those areas. So, you know, it's very, very possible that that is true. You know, I think they, you know, sometimes they say that like Joseph Campbell really put the stamp on this one, that sometimes in the myth, there's more truth in the myth than in reality. So myths are part of our deeper, you know, subconscious mind, and they emerge, these archetypes, and they're informing us and helping to guide us. And so it's not so important for me that they were there, but what is the truth that's contained in that myth that is important, that resonates with me, wakes me up, makes me kind of like, whoa, what's going on here, and opens my heart. And so, you know, this is where these stories are so important. And unfortunately, there's so little fragments here and fragments there of documentation. You know, it's hard to say for sure that we can say absolutely, but there's certainly lots of stories, and there's certainly lots of evidence with the way people through the ages, down through the ages, kept these things alive. When I do a lot of talks on the paintings of the heretics. These were people that were commissioned by the church, and so they were painting right under the church's nose, and they kept the stories alive through the various symbols that they chose to put in the paintings that alerted people that there's a greater truth in this picture if you look for these certain symbols.
Interesting. So when you were talking about the sacred union energetics between Mary Magdalene and Christ, Yeshua, would you say that is similar or the same as tantric sex, or where? I'm curious what your angle is on that.
Well, I think it's a much higher vibration than the union of sex, and in terms of how they held it and the way that they hold it. See, what we're talking about is that I have this body and I meet this person who has a body. He's male and I'm female. And then there's this physical union that happens with us, that we have sex. But in truth, and this is why Mary Magdalene was actually able to, and the Gospel of Mary Magdalene shows that's all a part of duality. And we think that this is a real thing. If it's hard, tangible, I can feel it and touch it and whatnot. But what Jesus is talking about is he's talking about we are one with God. And so anything that we see with our body's eyes, the only way we see what we see, which is I see you're separate over there, I see these other people are in their boxes and they're separate. So the only way that we know this oneness is we have to stop seeing through our body's eyes, because what our body's eyes does is it takes in light. And what is God? God is pure light. God is love. So we're taking in God. But when it hits the back of the brain, the light impulses are electrically, chemically interfered with by our brain, and it races up to the brain and it starts searching and finding, what does this light mean? What is it saying? And what is my judgment, evaluation? And I saw this as a beautiful example when my stepfather had a stroke. And he had a very unusual stroke. And the only way that we knew that something was off was that he picked up his fork and he held the fork up and he looked at us with this totally, completely baffled look like, what is this thing? Because the part of his brain that held the memory of what a fork was and would normally inform him about what the fork was and the memory of how to use it and all that kind of stuff was blocked. And so it's like what Jesus and Mary did as an example of what the demonstration was, they were giving us an opportunity to see with our third eye, with the visioning tool. Because in order for her to achieve this momentous state of consciousness where she knew that she was one with God. And there's a section in the Gospel of Mary Magdalene where she comes to him and she says, oh my God, she goes, I had a vision. She was trying to explain to him, I understand now what you're doing. And if I came to you and I said, oh, I'm one with God, you could look at me and energetically figure out pretty quickly that I still think I'm an ego and I'm a body and I'm a separate person. So even though I love to be in that state of consciousness all the time, and I've had brief, what the Course in Miracles talks about, holy instances, right? Moments in time where I am one with God, and I've felt that, and it's just pure joy and ecstatic bliss, and it's
yes.
Good things that we have to look forward to, right?
It's great we get these glimpses.
Right, but this process of entraining ourselves to not react, to go, like what Eckhart Tolle says, going vertical, going into the power of now, going into the present moment, becoming heart-centered. That's some of the steps along the way to achieve what they achieved, which is way beyond any sex that we could have or whatnot. And the depth and level and breadth of extraordinary feelings is way beyond, as one of my friends who had a very powerful near-death experience was telling me, she says, it's like having the best orgasm you could possibly imagine. And it doesn't stop.
So when we have the Thousand Goddesses gathering, you're going to be one of the priestesses of invoking specifically Mary Magdalene.
Yes.
And you said to me when we talked on the phone sometime back in the spring, one of our earlier conversations about the beloved, Martin Luther King's, one of his statements. I don't know what the right word is. Statements, maybe not the right word.
The beloved community.
Yeah. Because as soon as you said that, I was like, that is one of the purposes of the Thousand Goddesses gathering, is for that day to plant a seed of what a beloved community feels like, looks like. So can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah. Well, what happens is just like when Joseph Rowe was going deep into these sacred holy words, they literally hold, because they're some of the purest thoughts of God. So they hold some of the highest frequencies and vibrations. And so when we let that in, when we take that, when we stop for a moment in time, and with the intention and the purpose of what we're doing for the Thousand Goddesses, is that we are claiming what Mary Magdalene did. She claimed her whole self. She became wholehearted. She became attuned to her at one moment. And she talks about this state of consciousness of the anthropos state. So the anthropos is, and that's why the Little Mermaid movie was such a metaphor, because the mermaid was half and now she wanted to be whole. She wanted to be fully human. So in the Gospel of Mary Magdalene, it talks about becoming fully human, means becoming all that you are, and all that you are is the divine nature of God. Everything that you are, there is nothing that is not a part of God. And it is our ego that tells us, oh no, that's quite enough of that holiness stuff, and you are separate. And not only that, you like your separate. I love my separate bed, I like my own car, I like my own bank account. We're really entrained. So this is a new way of thinking. But in order for us to have heaven on earth, in order for us to have the Thousand Tara prophecy manifest, we need to create that field that Rumi talks about. And that field comes from when we all stand together and we claim and we hold the divine nature of our higher selves, and we support each other in allowing it. Now, there will be some people in the group that go right there. They know how to do that. They welcome it. There's no resistance. For other people, there's resistance. And one of the things that I learned in studying the Gospel of Mary Magdalene is that the smell of a rose removes your resistance to your ascension. Because when you smell a rose, the beauty of the rose just opens your heart. It's just so amazing. So I will have the Rose of Sharon, which is the rose that was in the Garden of Gethsemane with Jesus. That Magdalene's rose is the Rose of Sharon. I will have the rose oil there so that people that need that support or help can come and smell the rose. And I don't know if I'm pretty sure it must be happening out there on the East Coast, but in California, all the commercial rose vendors have DNA removed the scent of the rose out of roses. You cannot buy a rose in the supermarket that smells like a rose.
Oh, wow. Yeah. I have noticed that they really don't have a scent.
Corporatizing thing of removing. And this is the way in which the mystery school serves people, because it brings back the scent of the rose. You have your altar, you have your roses, but they're roses that are from the master gardener, the woman who has grown them in her garden and has cultivated them. And we have amazing beekeepers and rose garden keepers in our area.
It's interesting because one of our sponsors for the Thousand Goddesses Gathering is this woman named Natalia Schott has a company called La Vie de la Rose. And she and her husband have an amazing garden in Minnesota. I think it's in Minneapolis. And they make flower essences, and the vibrational quality, the purity of their products are just so beautiful, but they're tapping into those energetics of the rose. And I asked him, I said, do you have this name because of the connection with Mary? And she said, no, honestly, it was just because of their love of the rose. I'm sure on a subliminal level, it was really there. So we only have like 4 more minutes right now, Christy. This hour has flown by as we knew it was going to. I want to just share with everyone who's listening tonight and those who will be listening to the recording that Christy is going to make available teaching that I'm going to give everyone her email address. It's going to go out in the email tomorrow with the link to replay this or download this interview. But Christy's got a really fascinating teaching about the Mary Magdalene and the Divine Feminine and the crop circles. And so please look forward to that tomorrow. Please feel free to download. And I also want to make the announcement, Christy, about your Sunday afternoon workshop on October 21st in the DC area. Yeah. If you want to mention briefly about that.
Right. We're doing a deeper dive into the Magdalene mysteries, and Celestine will be joining me as well. And so I'm going to be going much deeper with some of these stories that I've touched on, along with many more, and also adding the music and the heart opening and the ritual. And I'll have the spikenard there, so you can, and the Rose of Sharon, so you can have your heart open and yourself anointed if you feel ready or feel called to receive that. Anointing is a totally lost art in our culture. And what I found with anointing is that it is the most profound sacred touch. It's like when you're anointing someone, you're standing before them and you're fully vertical, you're fully in presence of the Spirit with them, and you're seeing the Spirit of love with them, and it's a joining that's happening where you're blessing them and then they are blessing you. And there's no funny business. It's like we don't have that safety of touching someone in such a profound and deep sacred way. And so people are often in tears after it. They're just very touched and moved. And I just find it to be such a beautiful expression to open the heart and to help people to
beautiful.
Reach what Magdalene calls the climate of peace, because that's where she ended up living the remaining days of her life in a very profound state of bliss and deep peace. So, and
maybe
that's
we all find that. Yeah, maybe we all find that.
We can't help to.
Yeah, this is what the new world is about, the energy shifting on the planet. And Mother Gaia is calling for this in a huge way, which is why she's calling for the Thousand Goddesses Gathering to happen. Yeah. Okay, we have probably 30 seconds left to close this off at 9. And so I'm going to be posting in the email tomorrow about the workshop that Christy's doing that Sunday afternoon, the 21st. And you'll see it. Also, please register if you have not registered for the gathering and you are planning to join us physically on the mall in DC. There'll be announcements going out in there, and follow the event page on Facebook. If you haven't found it, it's really easy to find. Thousand Goddesses Gathering 2018. Just Google that or Facebook search it.
And
Go
shout
ahead, Christy,
out to
one more thing.
the men who are online. We deeply honor you because you are men who are what Magdalene would call integrated anthropos men. So you've accepted some aspect of your divine feminine self or you wouldn't be here. So there's a level of consciousness that we applaud and we're so grateful to you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for saying that. And actually that is another aspect of the Thousand Goddesses Gathering, is the spiritual call to have the divine masculine there. So we have a team of men who are stepping forward. This has been fabulous, Christy. We could talk a lot longer, but we need to wrap it up right now. Okay. Thank you for doing this. So next week, Celestine Starr will be interviewed, and I'm so looking forward to her and what she wants to share. And she's waving now to those who can see video. And then the final week, we're going to have an amazing woman named Latavia Doyen-Jones, who's an Oshun priestess, high priestess, who actually lives in Baltimore. So good night, everybody. Look for your email tomorrow, and we'll be back here next week, same time with Celestine. Good night to everybody, and hugs and love to you, Christy. Your path is so amazing. We need your wisdom and everything that you've been absorbing.
You for your hard work. You just made my life the most joyous moment.
He's on fire.
Yeah, it's always, you know.
I'm honored. I'm honored to hear that. All right, we're going to close out. Thank you to everybody. Good night, everyone. May everyone sleep well. And this is a beautiful